Go ahead and share my screen here.
That was you hitting record, right, Kyle?
That was me. Now we have
No more panic mode.
ESD about this. So, all right, everybody, thanks for coming on. Let me actually make sure I have the chat open. Got everything open to see here. There we go. So as we, talked about last week, if you guys have questions or comments as we're going, please go ahead and just type them in the chat. There will be periods, especially as we get into more practical stuff like today, where we'll be asking you questions, whatever. You might have more questions about this. It might be a little more interesting than kind of the things we talked about last week as far as intake and consultations. That's something we find very important, but also something that we know is not always the most interesting and immediately applicable fun stuff. So the stuff we talk about today is going to be a pretty big review of obviously the module itself. So hopefully you guys got a chance to read that. We attach quite a bit from a PDF perspective as far as the protocols that we use and even how some of those things translate into actual training protocols down the road. That'll be covered more extensively in a future call, but we will be talking about testing and assessment protocols, specifically from a physical and physiological perspective. So strength and conditioning. We talked a little bit more about like biometrics and movement assessments last week. So now we're branching into the actual training applications, which I don't know about you all, but I think Matt and I can both say that we find much more interesting and fun to talk about.
Yeah. This is why last week on both calls we were sitting there like, guys, I know this seems boring, but it's important. We got to get through it.
We're
We'll
gonna,
get to the fun stuff very soon.
we're gonna get through it. So, kind of what we look at core components. We break everything up into pretty classic strength and conditioning. You're going to see this, pretty much exclusively throughout. Um, all of these have subcategorization based on level of stimulus and substrate utilization. We'll talk about that as well, and get into that specifically with conditioning, probably more so today. But we will talk about the differences, as we get into like high stem, moderate stem, and low stem strength work as well, and kind of what those things mean to each of us, because it is a little bit different based on the types of athlete that we work with. So again, one of the things that the themes that you guys are going to be, or you should be considering as we get into all of this stuff this week again is there's no right and wrong way. Matt and I do things a little bit different. We have very, the same principles or very similar principles, but a little bit different in the application based on the context of the people that we work with. So the people that you work with might also be a little different. So as we're going through all of this, what we recommend is just, think about the concepts and how you might apply those things to your demographics, whether they be more general population or more performance based or performance based within different activities and different types of activities, right? So again, like this is where context is always going to be key, and everybody on this call might have a little bit different application based on the people that they work with, and that doesn't mean anybody's wrong.
Yeah,
So,
that's one of the reasons why when you guys get to see later on in the presentation what we go through, we're breaking everything down into the specific adaptation category that we're looking at coaching or the way that we're looking at developing that individual training quality, as opposed to writing out a specific assessment to do, right? It's not like you do a 15-second air bike assault test and that's it. That's the only the test that you do for like anaerobic power. You can do lots of different things and you just have a bunch of rules that you can follow to fit whatever it is you need to do within that category.
and even one of the things we'll get into is like not even fit them into that category, but sometimes it even comes down to logistics. What
Yeah.
piece of equipment do you actually have available to you? What type of space do you have available to you? Like all of your assessments and testing protocols also have to fit the gym space that you're in, or if you're remote like myself, the gym space that your clients are in. Right, that's something I work within quite a bit. Is part of my assessment outside of just the movement aspects that we talked about last week is the virtual gym tour that everybody gets to take me on in this process. Is I need to see the space that they are working within, how that space is laid out, and what types of equipment they have. And also just for practical purposes, how busy is it when they work out? You guys many of you have worked in a box gym world or in a private space. Like I see Anthony, on my 5 people I can see. It's like he knows what 7 a.m. in a box gym looks like. Like there's a lot of things that you cannot do in a crowded gym at certain times of day just because of space and people, right? So it's like you have to also think about some of the logistics that you'll be working around and your clients will be working around as you go through this process. So, one of the things that we think about in addition to that is yes, yeah, supersets at 5 p.m. Not going to work most likely.
Yeah, it's tough.
Your giant hypertrophy or density set that you want to do, with 6 exercises is not going to work at 7 p.m.
Yeah. 10 by 3 squats, not going to go very well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
10 by 3 squats might piss a few people off with 3 minutes rest or whatever. So some of these things, as we talk about the actual testing protocols, and then later as we get into the training protocols themselves, also these are things that we have to consider, and something that we tell a lot of our people is you're going to write programs that on paper are perfect and in reality are completely inapplicable and you're not able to actually get accomplished. And I think that's something that all of us need to just consider. Optimal is not always practical, and or realistic, based on the people that we're working with and where they're actually working. So that's always just something that should be in the back of your head as well as we talk about any of these processes. So, and you guys will see that as the conversation even revolves more around like why we pick what we pick and how those things interact. So I'm going to kind of go through my stuff first, just because it happened to be the first in the slide order, and then Matt's is going to be kind of second. He'll be pitching in here too, and kind of I'll ask him his thoughts on some things too, because he might have some additional things to add. But obviously, you guys have questions or whatever. Let me know. I've got the chat up. So when I'm looking at strength testing, with my demographic, strength is typically not the primary goal, right? A lot of my demographic are endurance athletes or field sport athletes or the infamous trendy hybrid athletes, which back in the day we just called strength and conditioning. That's literally what that means. They do strength work,
Regular fitness
work. They do fitness. They are fitness.
Regular fitness.
Yeah. So strength is a component, but it's not always like this overwhelming primary component, right? Yeah, Dean. Yeah, military. Military is going to be your original hybrid, but we've also taken fitness has already copied military enough that I don't think it can do it any more than it already has. So I'm glad I'm actually glad they went away with that, because
I think we need less fitness copying military.
People are already going to war in the gym every single day. We don't need to like further complicate that aspect of things. So yeah, I think for me, strength is always a consideration, but I look at it differently than Matt does, right? Where he's working with strength athletes, where that is the primary component, that is what they're looking at more specifically. I'm looking at strength in a much more general sense. So I'm dividing that up into tolerance and capacity. You're going to see tolerance and capacity repeated a lot. These are terms that I actually got from Dr. Jared Boyd. If you guys are familiar with him, he's the team physical therapist for the Memphis Grizzlies. He is also one of the smartest people on the internet in this industry. So if you don't follow him, follow him. Dr. JFit Boyd is his name online. He doesn't post a lot, but what he does,
he got a real job.
Yeah, he's got a super cool job. He's done a lot of different things. And he's an awesome dude.
He's working with like NBA teams, so he doesn't have to post on Instagram anymore.
He doesn't have to post on Instagram. He got a really good gig, deservedly so. So.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, these are things where, he used these terms in a presentation he did for us a few years ago, and they really resonated with me. Where, tolerance is really you're looking at your high end output, you're looking at levels of intensity, right? So it's your ability to tolerate stimulus at the upper end. So for me, 1 rep maxes don't necessarily yield a huge ROI. So I typically break it into down into a 3 RM. And that gives me a estimated 1 RM that then I can build progression and application strategies off of as I get into intensification and accumulation and metabolic phases down the road, right? So I look at 3RM and I look at training maxes typically. So again, like it's probably not even a true 3RM. Like it's going to be a 3RM at, RPE 9, not RPE 10, where you've got a 7-second concentric on your third rep of whatever exercise you're doing. And I use these for my primary variations or, my main lifts, if you want to call them that. So typically I've got a hinge variation, a squat variation, and a press variation. For some people, I will also add a pull variation in with that. I also, as we get into programming, you're going to see a lot of my programming where I don't program a specific variation of these exercises. I program variation or hinge of choice, squat of choice, and then we work within the variation that person is the most comfortable progressing and loading. Because again, I don't have competition standards that I need to meet like Matt does. So for a squat, for instance, I've got clients where their primary variation is a back squat. That's totally cool. I've got people where it's a front squat, a Hatfield squat, or a single leg variation. And I really don't care as long as we choose what that is and it's progressible for the person and they're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it. Right. I'll look at, their biomechanic or movement screens. And if I see something, that gives me a little bit of kind of a red flag indicator where I'm like, this person might have a little trouble progressing this further. I might suggest different variations and different loading schemes, like a front load as opposed to a back load or something of that nature. But the reality of it is most of the people that I work with are pretty highly trained. And at this point in their, training age or lifting careers, they know what works for them and what they feel comfortable loading up and progressing. So I give them a little bit more of autonomy from that perspective. I just need to know what it is and what we're going to be moving to. And that can also change over time. So from Matt.
No, I'm just moving
Okay.
my seat
So
forward.
yeah, so we'll talk more about like how that progresses over the course of a training block. Capacity, again, like this is going to be a lot of accessory work for my people. Typically, I'm looking at this in either myofibral or sarcoplasmic based rep ranges and volumes. So within the testing phase at all, one second, I'm going to be using different types of progressive volume strategies. For some people, I'll use density. For some people, I will use just basic sets of 3x15 and so on. I gave a little bit of an example, even with that on Friday with a client I've got coming in who's very gen pop right now. So I will pick a strategy that kind of works best for that person, that athlete, based on their training age and what they're comfortable doing. But they're typically pretty high volume, and I'm looking at improving total volume over the course of those 4 weeks for that person, and just really seeing like what they're able to do in a very specific time of work, typically. Dean, yes, ask a question.
Thank you, Carl. I was just going to ask what the prerequisites would be for you to fall into the category of giving an athlete autonomy over their compounds. And I suppose there's a bit of preference with that, isn't there? But I'm trying to layer this into my perspective with potentially some of the operators we work with, the tactical athletes, the different variations of levels from whether you're working at special forces level all the way down to, an engineer that's joined the military at the age of 16 and supposedly has a good training age, but I think
He's at the research training age of 3 to 12 weeks, right?
Yeah, exactly that. They come with all the spunk, but unfortunately the desire is just the desire's there, but there's just nothing coming out the other end. So I'm maybe just layering the questions around if there's a prerequisite that you're looking for that you give the autonomy to that athlete, because I think there is some warrant to that.
Definitely. So I do look at training age again, like that's going to be contextual. Like, I'm going to be looking at typically a year over of pretty consistent training is what I would consider a lower intermediate for most of these people, and probably again having a better idea of like how they move and what they prefer at that point. Again, my people aren't lifters per se, so their training age might not be equivalent to Matt's people, based on that same amount of time as far as like total volumes, total sessions, total exposures. I look at injury history. I look at, if something's bothering them now, knees, lower back, like just typical stuff, the ability to hold a front rack, with some people, depending on what variation they want. And then I look at technique, and it's like if I'm seeing like technique failure pretty early on in the process, I'm probably going to have something that's either loaded differently or has more constraints within it. And that's where like I'll make recommendations based on what I'm seeing. Like if I've got somebody and their body weight squat is nips to knees, super hingy, and then I load them up and they do a back squat, and it's the same thing. They're not able to counter that load. That might be something where I'm like, hey, this might be something where early on in the process, just from a pure skill acquisition perspective, we might have a front loaded squat. And that could be, again, based on their preferences, a full front rack, traditional. That could be a Zercher. That could be an SSB or a cambered bar, or that could be an actual Hatfield if they really want to be able to load it up and they're pretty strong. I'm just going to find the variation at that point where I feel, is the most progressible for that person and is going to have the least amount of obstacles moving forward. And again, most of my people, based on the demographic bias, they're typically not dead set on a certain variation. So I also have that luxury where it's like people aren't usually fighting me about this. Like if I make a recommendation, they're not like, oh, no, I have to do this. I want to do this variation, even if it just, looks terrible. Sometimes even, they're stubborn and sometimes it feels terrible and they still want to do that variation. In the past, I've had that, that aspect come in. So most of my people, it's like they are going to be traditionally open to what I'm suggesting and at least give it a try. Again, it's like you would hope most clients do, but we know that's not always the case. We have a lot of people that some of you have probably worked with that pay you a lot of money just to not listen to you do the things that you put on a program for them, right? So it's not always the case. But yeah, it's a combination of training age, injury history, and current discomfort / pain. And then just, like the eyeball test. Like when I'm looking at something like, like I'm probably going to have diminishing returns at a certain point on this simply because you're breaking down now, right? Like you're not able to maintain, fairly decent movement or full range of motion or whatever early on in the process. That might be a skill issue. That might be a loading issue. There might be a more direct path to progression for that person. Because again,
Dean, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please go for it, sir. Thank
Do
you.
you do more, are your people more team based or more individual based?
So a
Like your
mixture.
programming.
Yeah, it's a mixture. So we've
Okay.
got my programming from an athlete standpoint, client standpoint is individual orientated.
Okay.
In my professional role, it's a lot more team and group orientated, but we're trying to actually take on a bit of interestingly, a little bit of a concept that the US Marines and the US Special Forces are currently doing, where you guys have got like MCTs, which military correctional training guys that look after like physical development for anybody that's in your forces.
Mhm.
And they only really do like a low level course. I think it's like the equivalent of what would be a 6-week PT physical training course or something description
Okay.
like that. So they give the program to the individuals. We're trying to run a bit of a testing gate at the moment with some of the guys that we work with and giving them the autonomy of, we give them the program. The program set is, here is a squat pattern for the day that we want you to superset with X pattern. We want you to hit an RPE of A, B, C, or D. And then my team and my coaches, my assistant S&C coaches will be out on the shop floor almost monitoring where they sit on the scale. So there's a bit of individuality, but there is also a bit of group environmental dynamics as well that we want to try and push. But the other side of that coin is you don't want people to then not start breaching into like an RPE 8, 9, 10,
Right.
form breaks down, eyeball coaching, etc., and all the other bits and bobs that come with that. And, we're looking at it from a conceptual standpoint. It's more team and group orientated. So I like how that autonomy is given, because I think there's a lot of value in that, especially within the military and with the population that we're working with at the moment. Physical fitness is becoming so much more harder to sell to people that are joining a role which requires them to be fit and healthy. And I think the younger population that I'm coming up against, they're struggling to grasp the concept of, I need to be fit and healthy for the task. And unfortunately, it's what we call the PlayStation generation that I think is an unfair description, but they just don't value health as much as the ways that we used to do it. So we're trying to find ways in which we can maybe, leverage autonomy, as it
Yeah.
were.
So with that, personally, I would look at giving the group ones a lot of autonomy and having them self-select into groups of different people. Like if you've got 5 people, one person who's like going to lead a team of back squats, well, then everybody, you're going to have a bunch of people jumping in on that one. Same thing with like hack squat or front squat or SSB or whatever squat pattern you're going to have those people do. And they're going to pair in and work in together with those individuals. And when you're on your individual people one-on-one, I'd probably assign individual movements to them, because if you're working with them one on one, they're going to want that a little bit more anyway. And like in my opinion, they probably I don't know if they'll want that level of autonomy, but I think with the like fostering that level of autonomy with the team people is a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, we normally base it off of a bit of a spider flow diagram.
Yeah.
So when we test our guys, we get a very quick snapshot about the deficits that they have in performance. So if there is a deficit that we're seeing in a single leg pattern, for example, or there's a power deficit, then there are things that we can apply in that group stuff. So yeah,
Do they work
and I
out
like
together
that
at the same time?
autonomy. All of them do, yeah. And this is the
Oh,
other
that's even better.
complexity.
Yeah.
The other
Yeah, that's even
complexity
better.
that we have is we've got 130 thrusting, egotistical, testosterone-ridden young men and women
Phenomenal group
walking.
of adjectives, by the way, to describe your
Yeah,
relation.
like they're a vibe, right? They're
Yeah.
proper. They don't no holds barred type of characters. So they're all in the same gym. There's logistical, environmental, resource stuff constraints, but this is why the autonomy side of life might be something that I could
Absolutely.
inject into what we're doing, and that could be really valuable.
Absolutely, because then you also start to work on developing a leadership dynamic amongst all of the individual groups where somebody selects into one thing, a bunch of people join that, and there's people rallying around and like helping each other through.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly it.
the other side of things too is, or even along the same vein is, we talk a lot about like, auto regulation and self organization with individualized training. But the more people that you're training and the more people that you're working with, the more benchmarks and standards you kind of have to set. Like you have to be able to categorize and allow people to self-select properly. So you might have a few like loose standards. So when they are self-selecting, again, like Matt said, like maybe you just give them 3 choices
Yeah.
or 4 choices and not every choice, right?
Yeah.
So
Here's
it's
the options you got for today.
right, like it is self-selection, but it's a very controlled self-selection where it's not the entire map, you're choosing the routes, right? Like it's where you open up your Apple Maps when you map a place and it gives you 3 different selections. Even though somebody could pick 20 different ways to get to wherever they're going, it's going to pick the 3 most efficient ways. Maybe that's what you're doing, where you're like, hey, I got a back squat, I got a Zercher squat, I got a single leg variation or something of that nature, where it's like these are 3 very different but all pretty trainable and pretty loadable selections based on what you want to do. And these are the 3 controlled pathways that I'm going to give this person or this group of people to choose into. And then from there, like Matt said, you will see kind of who takes charge, who leads the way, and how they kind of work within that group. That might be how I do it, rather than giving them like 6 or 7 choices or
Yeah.
all the choices. You just give them a few very controlled ones that you've selected.
Yeah, based on the amount of coaching team that staff that's available that day, that makes sense.
Yeah, really appreciate the answer. Thank you. Sorry for taking up time. Apologies.
I think that was super applicable. Yeah, you guys know, like we're always down to probably 2 down to just like fucking shit talking.
Tangents are our thing, man. That's what we do.
We will talk about training. So getting into like kind of what I'm looking at here, again, the primary exercise is, like I said, we're getting into the 3 rep training max. I use ascending load over a 4-week block. So week 1 for the main lifts, I'm doing 3 sets of 5 at 6, 7, 8 RPE. Week 2, I'm doing 3 sets of 5 at 7, 8, 9 RPE. Where the cue is, begin your first set with the second set from last week, move up 5 to 10% as you're able each round. Week 3, I'm breaking into triples again, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to start that 6 at last week's 7. Same thing, like a 7 at 5 for me is going to be fairly close to a 3 at 6, or a 5 at 7 is going to be fairly close to a 3 at 6, or at 6 for a lot of the people that I work with, at least. Again, probably not nearly specific enough for Matt. For my people, we're gonna get to a good point at the end. And then the fourth week again, 3 sets of 3 at 7, 8, 9. So what I'm taking people from is basically their first set in week 1 is a set of 5 at RPE 6. And by the time we get to the last set at week 4, we are getting into a triple at 9. And that's, for me, again, working with people who aren't usually as experienced and confident of lifters. That's also a great way, like psychologically, to increase load, but also decrease novelty as much as possible throughout that process. Oh, Chris Kelly hopping there. Where, you know, even within that last day where we're getting into their max loading, quote unquote, 2 of the sets they've already done before. So by the time they hit that third triple, there's usually not like a whole lot of anxiety and fear and threat going into that. Like they're usually pretty confident that they're going to be able to hit whatever load they are, because that's really the only true like new set, if that makes sense, or new loading, right? So I do that from that purpose. I'll use ascending load within training and other points sometimes, but I really like it for the testing process just because it allows me to, in my experience, I don't want to say safely, but progress people with the least amount of risk into their heavy lifts, especially a population that's not always used to lifting heavy.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm working with endurance athletes and fucking soccer players. They're not power lifters who are used to loading up a bar. So this is a very easy way for me to kind of get them from point A to point B. Accessory stuff, like I said, these are going to be typically sarcoplasmic. You guys have this entire table attached within the website. Taylor, yeah, go ahead and ask about primaries before I get into this.
So I've been playing with this a little bit lately, doing some people respond better to descending reps rather than ascending load. So do you think like the first 2 weeks, maybe like a 9-7-5 and then like a 7-5-3 for like the second 2 weeks would be applicable?
I mean, do you is the question.
Okay.
Like, I think it definitely could be. The only thing I would worry about there with my population is because a lot of them aren't super experienced lifters, is I would be worried a little bit about fatigue management as we get into the last rounds. Like when I'm doing 5s and triples and I'm doing that escalating pattern, like my goal with like the first 2 rounds basically of every day is that they feel super easy and they're explosive and they're almost like extended warm-ups for like the one working set for this purpose. For someone who's more experienced, or even, you know, it's kind of a bell curve, even for someone who's less experienced, that descending rep scheme might actually be super valuable. So again, like we said, like there's not a right way or a wrong way to do this. I could see that working for sure. Like I would have no issues with that, just conceptually.
Taylor, I'll be covering that very soon as well.
Yeah, Matt, I was about to say that might even like venture a little bit more into like Matt's style of his stuff.
Yeah. I picked up a lot of that stuff from like N1.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think Matt might, be a little more similar to that and touch into that more with his people for sure. Getting into accessory stuff, like I said, I do a lot of AMRAP stuff. Like you'll see weeks 1 and 2 is 10-10 or 10-10 AMRAPs with RPE 8 and RPE 8 plus. I'll do tempos on that too, where the first sets of controlled reps, the 2 sets of 10, I'll usually do with like, 2-second eccentric or something. And the AMRAPs, I'll let somebody just hammer at 1-1 tempos, controlled, but I'm taking the eccentric out of it. And basically what I look at there is if the person gets, 150% of the rep assignment in the first 2, at that point, like if they did 10-10-15 or over, at that point we definitely can move the arc, like increase their load 5 to 10% the next week and let them go. But I'll do the first 2 weeks 10-10 AMRAP 8, then 8 plus, and then weeks 3 and 4 8-8 AMRAP for 8 and 8 plus as we go, just to see what those jumps actually look like and where they're going. Density accessories, same thing. I'll go from 90 seconds to 2 minutes maintenance, and then increase the 90 seconds and then 2 minutes maintenance from weeks 1, 2 to 3 to 4. Looking at total reps, total volume over the course of that. I kind of outlined that a little bit on Friday with my Gen Pop client. And then for someone who's like pretty novice, I'll just do standard load maintenance across different programming strategies where it's like you're going 3 sets of 12 at 7 to 8, 3 sets of 10 at 8, 3 sets of 8 at 8 to 9, 3 sets of 8 at 9, or whatever. Something that's way more traditional, and just kind of see where they fall, and get them comfortable in the weight room. I'll be the first person to tell anybody, like, density is not appropriate for everybody. That might be a great way to make people hate lifting really early on in their process. So I will rotate between strategies based on what their training age is, based on where I feel like they're comfortable and what their preferences are through the communication, the consultation process as well. So again, those are kind of my three main ones. I've done other things as well, but these are the three that I typically stick with within the testing block more so. All right, so getting into conditioning, I want to make sure Matt's got plenty of time here too. So testing and assessment quality, same thing. We're looking at tolerance and capacity. So we're looking at high stem and then moderate stem and low stem. That one backwards. There we go. So tolerance focused qualities I'm looking at from a conditioning perspective, max wattage or speed or velocity, whatever you want to call it, depending on the modality they're using. If somebody doesn't have a selected activity, like they're not a runner or they're not a rower, or they're not just a road cyclist, I will typically, as we mentioned before, pick a fan bike as my testing protocol modality of choice, simply because it is the less skill dependent of everything else. Anybody can get on an assault bike and work it. It only does one thing. The arms pump and the legs pump. The limiter is somebody's physiology 99 times out of 100, not skill. And that makes it a very good testing modality because you've almost all but eliminated outside variables from the picture. It's about as much of a vacuum as you can put somebody in a gym space. And it's testable and repeatable, or retestable and repeatable, and trainable along the way. So that's what we use a lot of. I will do repeat max wattage speeds at 85% or higher. Once somebody meets a certain criteria or threshold at 85%, I'll just move it up to 90% and we'll go. And by the time I have somebody doing, 10 repeat rounds of 10-second max effort sprints at 92% or so, there's a very good chance that they are, one, very fit, and two, their max wattage is probably increased over that amount of time as well, just through more training and better training. I will also look at max wattage and speed drop or velocity drop off through clusters. So we'll kind of explain both of those applications here. So again, max wattage, I usually do a 10-second. I look at your peak, and I will end up basing the majority, not just strength, not just high stem work, but even getting into moderate stem and low stem. I will base a lot of the efforts off of percentage max wattage for a lot of people. It ends up working really well for pacing. We can talk about like what that actually looks like, as we get into more slides. But when I'm looking at sprint repeats, like I said, I look at 85% as my first marker. So I usually do a 10-second on, 150 rest. So again, we're looking at that point, almost a 10-to-1 rest to work, or 1-to-10 work to rest ratio with that. If you go by old school Charlie Francis, he usually looks like 1-to-10 to 1-to-15 in there. Lots of rest. Again, if we're looking at like high stem creatine substrate, we want to be able to replenish as much of that substrate as possible before your next round. The goal between these is not just to get fatigued. It's definitely not to get occluded. It's to see where your output actually drops with appropriate rest, right? So if you want to extend that rest out, you certainly can. I could extend this out in like upwards of 2.5 to 3 minutes if I really wanted to, and still be within appropriate times. The 10 to 150 just makes for a very nice, almost circuit-based thing where people can keep track of where they're at very easily. And I can, from a time coordination perspective, if I know somebody has to complete, their session in an hour, I know that this is going to be 20 minutes or less within that period of time. That's really what I'm looking at. It's logistics. If I had unlimited time with somebody, I might do it a little different. So this is going to be auto-regulated through that percentage base. As soon as somebody's not able to peak at 85%, we're cutting reps, whether that's their third rep or their ninth rep. From there, we're going to keep implementing this within the training cycle and have them go from, 3 reps to 4 reps to 5 reps to 7 reps to 9 reps to 10 reps, whatever. Once we get to 10 repeats, at that point, I'm looking at, usually raise it to 90%, and we'll see the same thing. Maybe they drop back down to 4 repeats, 5 repeats. You can run this as a progressive overload linear scale for a very long time before you have to switch it up. And if somebody kind of cruises through it and does it really easy, retest them and see if their max wattage is actually higher than they thought it was. Sprint clusters, same thing. I'm basing it off max wattage. Here, though, they're going to go even if they do not hit markers. I'm just going to keep track of what that drop off actually looks like. So I'm going to look at the drop off from rounds 1 to 2 to 3, and if there's 4th round to 4, and then I'm going to look at the drop off between the first round of both clusters or all 3 clusters, depending on how many they're doing. And again, I usually keep this shorter rest. We're going to do 50 seconds, and then we're going to do 3 to 4 minutes rest in between clusters. Those numbers, as you guys are programming stuff like this, the rest time between clusters, the rest time between individual sets is not all that important. You just want to make sure it stays consistent as you're testing and training. If you want to do 150s again, and then 5 to 6 minutes in between, that's totally fine. Just keep it there so that you actually have something that's standardized for test retest as you're going. I use this a lot with my field sport athletes because it's going to mimic the life cycle of playing a sport, especially a field sport like soccer or even a court sport like basketball, better than repeats with 1 to 10 or 1 to 15 work rest. I'm looking at, okay, I've got an athlete who has to sprint, short rest, sprint again, short rest, sprint again, short rest, sprint again, long rest, 2 more sprints, long rest, 4 or 5 more sprints, long rest. Like, I want to see where they're at as far as repeatability on shorter sub-maximal speeds runs. And that makes sense for everybody. So again, just 2 different qualities. I'm not as worried as much about percentage drop off, and I'm definitely not auto-regulating it. I'm making them work through the fatigue on this one. Does that make sense to everybody? I see head nods from people I can see, but keep in mind I can't see everybody, so type it in otherwise. For capacity focus qualities, I will do just a straight distance test as a benchmark for a lot of people. So this is where I get a 2-mile assault bike test, a 1-mile run, a 2K row or ski, and I will build a lot of the conditioning protocols off of this as well. Also have a glycolytic endurance, which will outline an ascending threshold, which will outline, and then oxidative endurance test that will also outline here on the next slide. Or the next 2 slides. There we go. So 2-mile test, again, it's just a 2-mile test on the assault bike 4 times. It's as straightforward as possible. This is something that if I'm going to include it in a testing block, I'm definitely going to run it 4 times. Because what you will see is people who've never done this don't know how to pace it in their first 2 or 3 times. Their scores are going to be reflective on their ability to actually pace it way more than their actual physiological ability. So you will see their progression line go like this, and then kind of even out as they get closer to what their glycolytic or threshold ceiling would actually be. But you'll see massive jumps from the first time they do it to the second time they do it to the third time they do it. And then those jumps will get less and less as you actually see physiological adaptations take place later on in the training. This is something like I've talked with Taylor about this on our individual call. It's like you have somebody do this for the first time, they might get 6 minutes, but don't be surprised if they go from 6 minutes to like 5:15, 4:45, and then it's like 4:40, 4:37, 4:32, right? That's what the progression arc ends up looking like, is big jumps going into little jumps, going into very slow progress as the adaptations actually occur, just because they're much higher to their actual ceiling from a performance perspective. Glycolytic endurance, I take that max wattage they have. Say it's somebody super, super duper strong like Matt, and it's 2000 watts. This is actually higher than that, but we'll call it 2000 for easy math. And I'm going to have them run as long as they can at 40%. So Matt would be doing 800 watts for as long as possible, just maintaining above 800 watts.
My best was 76 seconds and it was horrible.
It's fucking terrible. The thing about this test is also, like, if you want to see what somebody's like just psychological state and
See what they're made of.
Like this test will absolutely do it, because it does not sound like much, but yeah, it's like when I did mine, it was 700, I think it was 760 watts, and I did it for about, it was just over a minute and a half. It was like 96 seconds or something. And it was miserable from like 40 seconds on.
Yep.
Like clock, you will never watch a clock move slower.
Yep.
Once you actually hit like full glycolytic threshold, your legs are fully occluded and you're just pumping with all you have.
The worst part about that test is you have to look at the clock and the wattage meter the entire time to make sure you're doing it right.
Oh, right. So you're just pumping.
So you're super aware.
It is not fun. Yeah, Dustin. So standards, yes. So this is where, for me, and this is actually one of Evan Pycon's tests. We got this, or I got this from him because he made me do it in his beta group for Knox. And I was like, I like this / hate this so much, I'm going to use this. So if you're under 30 seconds, or if you're 30 seconds to a minute, actually, if you're under 30 seconds, we've got big issues. If you're 36 to a minute, your capacity is poor. Like, you're probably a very high occluder. Like, this is where we would get people who lift a lot and probably don't do any conditioning. You're going to see that 30 to 60 mark. Lots of occlusion, high occluder. You have a hard time dumping fluid and buffering acid at that point. That's going to be something that we probably need to bring up. That's a very, very trainable quality. If you're between 60 and 90, that's like passing the grade. Like you're probably like pretty even. You've got a good amount of capacity. If you're over 90, you're probably limited in power, is kind of what we decided at that point. And your biggest area of opportunity is probably increasing your overall max wattage to match your capacity. Like, if I have somebody that does 3 minutes on this test, they're either elite, like an elite cyclists, or they have no power.
Yeah. Or their max wattage was 650.
I have a client whose max wattage was like 1100, and he is someone who cycles a lot. His max wattage was 1100, and he did his test for like, I mean, it was like 2.5 to 3 minutes, somewhere between there. And we talked about it. I was like, well, you actually did too well on this test. Capacity is not an issue, but we can get we have a much better return on training investment by increasing your wattage and trying to get it up to like 1500. Like, that's going to be the adaptation that's going to yield the largest results on your overall performance, because capacity is not your limiter from a glycolytic perspective, right? So again, that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like the 30 on, 90 off. Yeah, it's just not a fun test at all. Yeah, if you've got MyZone, that works really well with the right. Yeah, you got better toys than we do, Dean. You don't got to keep flexing.
Listen, Dean.
Listen, bro.
Listen, dude.
We're just out here like hooking a Knox up to our leg and hoping for the best, staring at the screen.
I got whatever my clients tell me they have. I'm like, where are you training?
Can you download the free Strava app on your watch? Yeah, so that's fun. The glycolytic endurance is good. And then the glycolytic repeats, I will also do. This is actually very similar to one of Matt's strength tests, but it's something that I've utilized in the past, where I will take that max wattage. Sometimes I will also use, for a lot of people, their 2 mile average watts actually works out really well for this as well. And that's another thing that I will sometimes use. But I want repeated 1 minute intervals at 25% max wattage with 1 minute rest in between, or 1 minute intervals at 2 mile pace with 1 minute rest in between. And I'll kind of do the same thing where it's like, once we get to 10 repeats of this, and 10's an arbitrary number, but once we get to 10, at that point we can probably retest, or we can up the percentage and roll with it and have them repeat that. But this is a painfully easy way to increase fitness. Like, I use this as a training strategy. Like, this is one where it's a test, but it's also a training application that I use quite often with people. And all of us talk about, like, again, 1 minute on, 1 minute off repeats on an assault bike is not a new application at all. But I think a lot of people don't have a very good idea of what that intensity should be and what kind of standardization should be put around, like, what their wattage is, what their pacing strategies are there. I found that 25% max wattage, like, again, like for someone like Matt, that would be 1 minute repeats at 500 plus watts. You're cruising at 1 minute rest. That might be something where the first couple rounds that he does feels okay, but once you hit like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they no longer feel okay.
Yeah.
So that ends up being a pretty good test and a pretty good way to increase fitness as you're going, pretty quickly, in my experience. And it's so dumb, it's foolproof. So this is something we also got from Evan. He's done a lot of additional testing, but it's also just through experience, like working with athletes. Like, I've played around with these, and this is where a lot of my higher end people just kind of sit. So I use that as like an auto regulation mechanism where it's like, and that's why I said is like, once you're able to get to 8 to 10 rounds of this, then we will progress it, because most people don't start out being able to do this right away. So it's one of those like testing strategies where it's like, I know you're going to fail the test early on, but now we have a carrot to work towards. And that makes it kind of a trainable quality as we get into it. And that's something that we're going to talk about a lot in the upcoming weeks, as far as like making your testing trainable and your training testable. Like, it's this protocol I can utilize in any phase ongoing for 16 to 20 straight weeks probably, and just watch them improve as they go and increasing percentages as they go, as they're able to meet those requirements. And their fitness is going to be raised as a whole, probably as we're going with this as well. So
one of the things I think a lot of people mess up with strength and conditioning is treating them like they're completely different disciplines when they're pretty much the same, right? Like, if we're looking at why we would choose like 80 to 85% of somebody's max heart rate, or 80 or like 40% of max wattage, or something like that for like a power test, that's basically the same as what you would be doing with strength training if we're choosing 80% for a couple sets of 5, right? So it's ends up being the similar prescription there, just depending on what that person's individual goal is and what modality you're moving them to. So it ends up being almost the exact same thing, because you're looking at it from like a total time under tension kind of related thing, where it's like, if you're doing a set of 5 at RPE 8, that should be around 80%, which is probably going to take you 15 to 20 seconds, 20 to 25 seconds of total work, which would kind of fall within that glycolytic category of work. So if we're putting it about 80% of max wattage, it should be somewhere around there, and then we can progress it up over time.
yeah, and that's even where, you'll see as we get into like training applications, where, like glycolytic repeats might be anywhere between 30-second intervals to 2-minute intervals. I give a percentage range.
Yeah.
Like, that turns into like 15 to 30% and not 25%. Just because it's kind of like the duration of work is also going to influence like how much output I'm looking for. Right. If I'm doing 30-second intervals with 90-second rest, and it turns into a 1 to 3 rest to work and shorter duration, I'm going to be looking at a higher percentage max wattage from that perspective. If I do 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, and I go back to a 1-to-1 work to rest and a longer duration, I'm probably going to be hovering more between like around that 20% max wattage, right? So again, we set an initial benchmark, but the more and more you apply these applications to your athletes, the more understanding you will get as far as like where they're at and what the progression strategy is going to look like. Yep. And this is why we do, again, partially a testing block is I'll have them run through this protocol usually bi-weekly. So they do it at least twice in a testing block. And from that point on, well, now I know, is that 25% too high or too low for this person? Do I need to reset my percentages just based on their ability to progress? So again, this gives me better data to work with from a programming strategy moving forward also, right? So that's another thing we're looking at. Repeat threshold as I get into more oxidative. And oxidative, again, is something we're going to split into threshold work as opposed to like zone 2 low slow work. So repeat threshold, again, I use 3-minute intervals because that's kind of the lowest threshold marker or interval time that I'll use. And as we talk about training, I was actually talking with a client this morning about it. Like, threshold's interesting because it's really dependent on what your client's activities are. Adnan, who's on this call and is working up into like higher distance, like endurance races, he's done threshold intervals that are 3Ks. I have some clients that do threshold repeats that are 5Ks because they run 50-mile races. Right. So again, like, these are things where like these threshold intervals, they can really go as long as that person's able to maintain their pacing strategy and their heart rate. The more fit they become, the longer they can go. But I'll start people with 3-minute intervals at 15 to 20% max wattage. If I get into running, I'm going to be looking at, different pacing, but this is for bike right now. We'll look at with 3-minute rest in between. I like a 1-to-1 on this until they get into their higher stem, and then we can adjust that. Again, if someone's running repeat 20-minute 5Ks, which I've had happen with athletes before, they'll run 3 or 4 of those. I'm obviously not doing a 20-minute rest time. I'll usually do like a 5 to maybe 10 rest time. I'm really just looking at them to, looking at what the recovery looks like and their ability to repeat. Test is over when client is no longer able to achieve desired output maintenance from this. Ascending oxidative, again, repeated 5-minute blocks with 1-minute rest. So the first block is performed at 10% max wattage, and I add 2 to 3% added each round until maintenance is no longer able to fit. So again, this can be anywhere between 2 rounds to sometimes 6 to 8 rounds, depending on somebody's level of fitness. And this is something that gets pretty spicy, from like somebody, like I've had people go from 150 watts on the first round to where by the time they're hitting 4th, 5th, 6th rounds, like they're into like the high 4s to sometimes even 500 watts for a 5-minute block. Which, if you guys are familiar with those markers, like that's fast.
Yeah, that's moving. 500
watts and for 5 minutes is going to get you probably about 2.2 to 2.3 miles.
Yeah,
like that's you're cruising at that.
And you're gonna feel like you're dying the entire time.
Your 5th or 6th round at that point. And then zone 2 heart rate duration. This is just continuous effort. Now we're looking at percentage heart rate. When I get into low oxidative, that's the only time where I'm really concerned about heart rate over outputs, as opposed to outputs over heart rate. Again, part of that is because your glycolytic and your creatine work is anaerobic, so heart rate doesn't really matter to me at all at that point. Just don't die, maintain outputs. And then threshold work, again, from that perspective, I'm still very output focused, and I let the heart rate kind of catch up to that as fitness increases. Those will still be, as like Evan would say, cardiorespiratory limiters. Like that's going to be a systemic limiter rather than a tissue limiter, whereas your glycolytic work, your limiter is probably going to be tissue in a lot of facts, where you're just occluding so much you can't keep going. Whereas when you get into the threshold stuff at the lower max wattage, it's typically going to be an aerobic limiter, where systemically you're just not able to maintain those outputs because of systemic fatigue, or you're hearing your heart rate in your temples and if you're familiar with that process.
Yeah.
Less. So we're going to look at 80 to 85% max heart rate. So again, that's just the 200 or the 220 minus your age. Sorry. So for old people like me, that would be a 178 max wattage or max heart rate. Theoretically, again, I've hit well above that in training. So it's a theoretical conceptual max heart rate, but it's what we use. So I would be going from 80 to 85% of that for as long as I can until my heart rate exceeds that at those percentages. So again, zone 2 heart rate duration, super fun. Probably, and again, I'd probably looking at like 10% as a goal, like 10 to 15% max wattage on that is where I would start. So
Kyle, you want to unshare your screen so I can share mine, and I don't have to be sitting there going, next slide, please.
is this my last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it is. Cool. All right. So
screen and relax. It's great.
if we're going into some of these strength assessments and everything, one of the things that I try to do when I'm breaking this down into hold on, I'm trying to figure out a way to make this look slightly better so I can see you guys. There we go. That works. Well, when I'm breaking down my programming and breaking down my adaptations, I like to break them down into specific adaptation categories, define a set of rules for them, define a set of movements that fit within those specific rules, and then assign protocols out from there. The reason why I try to do this is because I find that this structure allows me to have the most freedom for both movement patterns and order of exercises throughout the course of the individual week. So what I'm going to break down my adaptation categories into is the 3 that you see on the screen now, which are some neurological neurological adaptations, structural adaptations, and capacity adaptations. If we're looking at what those 3 things are going to mean, neurological adaptations are going to be things that I'm using to train the nervous system more so than the muscular system, right? So the nervous system, as we know, is going to be the thing that's the most responsible for all high threshold motor neuron recruitment, max force production, super heavy, slow, low velocity movements like heavy 1 rep max squatting, benching, deadlifting. All of those things are going to be driven primarily by the nervous system. Muscle cross-sectional area does impact those, but not to the same degree as motor neuron recruitment and motor neuron efficiency, right? So this is where that intermuscular coordination that we were talking about a bit last week really plays a big role, right? So neurological stuff is going to be all of that, like max strength, throwing, jumping, slams, all of those things. Those are all going to be something that I would consider to be a neurological adaptation. The way that I'm looking at these, the outline that I have for this is it's going to be movement pattern and goal specific. They are anything that's going to be a very high output movement, right? So high output could be something like throwing a baseball as hard as you possibly can, doing a med ball chest pass as hard as you can, throwing something over like doing a keg toss in strongman as hard as you can, a max effort deadlift, a max effort squat, max effort sled pushes. All of those things are going to be much more neurological adaptations, and they're because they require a high degree of intramuscular coordination, a low amount of specific time under tension, and they're not going to really do much to produce much for hypertrophy. So the loads for these are typically going to be over 80% or under 20%. Right? All that stuff within the middle is going to fall within the structural and capacity based buckets, depending on what we're going to be doing with the rep category on those. All of those movements should be, if the loads are going to be over 80%, this is going to be, see you later, John. Or JJ, see you later. This is going to be a slow velocity movement. If this is going to be something under 20%, this is going to be max velocity, right? So the whole goal with this is that we have to use something that's going to facilitate as max motor neuron recruitment and high threshold motor neuron recruitment. All of these should be effort over RPE7. So you should have to work fairly hard for this. If we're looking at throwing, doing like any kind of like 10 set repeat tosses, that's not really going to be developing any sort of neurological qualities. That's going to be kind of in the land of nothing, maybe some capacity oriented stuff, because you're not having to maximally recruit as hard as you can for every single thing, since it's much more repeat effort. So example movements, like I said, we've got squat, bench, deadlift, jump, throw, slams, cleans, jerks. Olympic lifts are kind of fit within this category as well. And some example easy protocols would be ascending load sets, top sets, down sets, rep drops, things like that. So anything that you're going to be doing where the load is going to be fairly heavy and you're going to be changing it afterwards, that's an easy way that we can fall within that neurological bucket. Structural movements. Structure is how I define what we're going to be using to develop the organism themselves. So we're going to be developing some kind of tissue, right? So we're going to be either working on connective tissue capacity. We're going to be working on muscle density, muscle size, or building up muscle cross-sectional area. All of those are going to fall within the structural section of my movement library, right? So these are going to be something that we're going to be training at long to mid-range muscle lengths. They're going to be muscular specific over movement specific, like neurological movements will be. They'll be high to moderate output, moderate to high external stability, and the loads are going to be anywhere from 30 to 80% as long as volume is equated over the course of that individual week, right? 1 to 3 reps in reserve. Rest period is going to be moderately long, just like a neurological adaptation is going to be. These are going to be machines, cables, dumbbells, barbells, any modality can be used here as long as it's going to be muscular specific over movement specific. So I'm not necessarily training a deadlift pattern here. I'm training your hamstrings with a barbell, if that was the way that I was going to outline this and like drive it out specifically for a client. This is where I'm going to be using top sets and down sets, straight sets again from 5 to 12 reps, 2 to 4 sets, myo reps and rep drops again is going to be something that'll fall in here. Finally, we're going to look at capacity work. So if we're looking at capacity work for hypertrophy and for training, this is where Kyle, like what Kyle was talking about the other earlier in the presentation with sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, right? And a sarcoplasmic stimulus, what we're looking at with this, we're going to be driving more fluid and nutrients into the individual cells themselves and developing the sarcoplasmic reticula of the cell. So what we're looking at there is hopefully some hyperplasia of the individual cell, allowing for that cell to grow and swell, pushing more nutrients into that area, pushing more nutrients into the muscle, and hopefully allowing the body to learn how to buffer out all of those hydrogen ions that are created through muscular contraction a little bit more effectively. So we're going to be looking at this to facilitate that more effectively. We're going to be working through as shortened muscle length or shortened muscle lengths as often as humanly possible, because the shorter that muscle length is going to be and the more biased towards that short position it's going to be, the less force you're going to be pushing into that muscle, the less output you're going to get for any of that stuff, and the more likely you are to develop a sweep pump. And the sweep pump is what we kind of want when we're looking at developing any sort of capacity in the muscle itself. The capacity oriented stuff and the structural oriented stuff, that falls within the category more of intramuscular coordination, because we're looking at developing either the strength of the muscle or the ability of the muscle to tolerate more work over time. So with this, it's going to be high amount of external stability, low to moderate output. Loads are going to be between 20 and 60%, and this is going to be fairly high volume with very low rest. So we're going to be doing straight sets, myo reps, and incomplete rest here as an easy way to just drive a tremendous amount of volume in towards those specific positions and get that capacity adaptation trained. Does anybody have any questions on the categories or anything so far?
I just like it when you say sarcoplasma.
Sarcoplasm?
Or sarcoplasm.
Sarcoplasmic reticulum?
Sexy.
Yeah. You guys want to talk about adaptations? I'll talk about adaptations and stuff all day. It's fun. It's where my brain focused. I didn't get to focus on something useful like engineering. This is what I got instead. Okay, but looking at these, the reason why I say I like to do it more like this is because you can use specialty machines, dumbbells, and all sorts of cables and stuff, but all of these things will work within each individual category depending on what your goal is for each one. So it's more about making the volume prescription that you're going to write out fit the individual adaptation that you're looking at training more than anything else. So let's take a look at some of those on this slide, right? So if I'm going to look at some of the protocols here, we're going to write them out a little bit more in depth. And Taylor, this is where your descending low or descending reps is going to kind of come into play if we're looking at something like a rep drop, right? So if we're looking at rep drops, that's exactly what I would use that for, right? So if you were to do a set of 7 at RPE 8, the set of 5 at RPE 8, and a set of 3 at RPE 8, potentially using the exact same load for all 3 of those, we're going to be working on a super great amount of technical competence, developing neurological drive, and working on a bunch of high threshold work capacity with something like that. And it's a great protocol to use with people who don't have the ability to do something like an ascending load and can't tolerate that level of work. Right. So that's exactly what I would be using. And that would fall within that category of a neurological training stimulus for me, for that individual. And it's a great test. This is why I break them all down into categories, because then I can make anything fit the category as long as it fits the specific outline and the rules that I kind of wrote out earlier. So some easy protocols with this. We've got ascending load, which is just increasing load or effort each set. So you're going to be doing like an example of a 3x3 at RPE 6, 7, 8. So again, we're looking at an increase of high threshold motor neuron recruitment. And we're looking at very minimal fatigue generated from each of these, but you've got a little bit of fatigue from each of the previous sets. But if we're doing any kind of like strict neurological training, this is probably going to be the entire protocol for that person's squat for that given day. So there's extremely little fatigue built up across the week, right? So if we look at that across the individual session, fatigue is probably going to be moderately high, but then it's immediately buffered out throughout the rest of the week because the squat volume across the week is very, very, very low comparatively if I was doing things like rep drops or top sets, down sets on other things, right? Which are still going to be neurological stimulus, but just at a little higher fatigue category. So if we look at how I kind of program this, I wrote these out as like lowest fatigue, slightly more fatigue, slightly more fatigue. Now we're starting to move into some of the most fatiguing stuff towards the end, right? So this kind of goes in order of least fatiguing to most fatiguing. Rep drops are going to be a great one to work on just improving technical competence. And this is going to be an area where you're just going to repeat the same load that you did for a given volume for more volume, right? It's a great protocol to work on building up a lot of technical ability with somebody, right? So if you have somebody who starts to fail and break down at a certain load as opposed to certain rep numbers or anything like that, all I'm looking at doing is increasing that person's ability to tolerate that work, right? So I want to increase that person's time spent working with that load. And the easiest way to do that is just reduce the volume of what they're going to do afterwards. So they'll hit that set for a set of 5, and then I'll have them do 1, 2, or 3 reps afterwards until they reach a certain RPE threshold. And then we call the session right there. And we call that assessment there. So if we see somebody who has some sort of a technical limitation, rep drops are a super easy assessment tool that we can use to see how they respond to that over time. Because if it's a confidence thing or a technical issue or just a neurological drive and intermuscular coordination related issue, this will kind of clean all 3 of them up at the same time. Top sets, down sets. This is the standard one that you guys always see powerlifters do on Instagram, where like I did a single at RPE 8 and 3x8 at 8 RPE 8 afterwards. It's something fairly similar, right? So what we're looking at here, this is going to be much more structural development because you're spending a lot more. You get a little bit of neurological work here, so like a very small amount, but you get a lot of volume towards the back down sets, which is going to work a lot more on that person's individual structural development, unless you're using it at a lower rep range. If I'm doing like triples and back down triples or a single and then 5 or 6 back down singles, that's probably going to be a bit more neurological. But usually I kind of classify this one as a bit more of a structural movement because that's how I personally program it and find it to be the most effective. But the easiest thing that we are looking at with this is a great fatigue management tool if you have somebody who is fairly sensitive. And I usually will pair these 2 together pretty frequently because they're also this one generates a lot more fatigue and this one generates a lot less. So doing the 2 of these together in separate sessions usually works pretty well to manage fatigue over the course of that week without overloading somebody and allowing them to progress on both of them. So their secondary session might be something here, their primary session might be something here, to give them the ability to really display max output on their primary session and see how they're going to be responding to that over time with training. Straight sets, everybody knows what those are, 3x8 at 8. So just going to repeat it for each one. Structural development, hypertrophy, and capacity, depending on the rest time. Myo reps are awesome. They're super fun. So you do a set of 10 at RPE 10 and then repeat that load for sets of 4. And you're going to repeat that work until you fail to get 4 reps, right? So if you end up getting 1 set of 4, that's great. If you get 12 sets of 4, you probably got to go a little heavier on the following week. This is going to be a good one for structural development, general hypertrophy, fatigue management, because it's going to be an oscillating amount of work that's done week to week, and general work capacity. And then incomplete rest is the final one that I'll end on. It's a goal of 8 reps. You're going to do 5 sets with a 45-second rest, and you're going to work on building up a lot of work capacity and a lot of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy with these ones. So these are going to be some of the categories that I like to use and some of the protocols that I'll use with this. And the reason why I'm not writing out any kind of specific one is because if you understand what the outline is and kind of what the protocol itself is going to look like, you can make almost anything fit any one of these buckets and it'll work super well for you guys. It just depends on what individual quality we're looking to build with that person, how I'm going to train it, and how I figure they're going to best respond to training to give them the ability to really progress over the course of that block. Does anybody have any questions on this? No? Kyle, you got anything you want to add in?
Just that all of these are gross.
They are. Yeah, they are. They're tough.
If you do them right, they are no fun.
The worst one is definitely rep drops. They are definitely the hardest one that you could make somebody do, and they're probably going to be. I shouldn't have put it here. I should have put this towards the very end because it is the most fatiguing movement protocol that exists. And when I'm doing something like that with somebody, I'm not necessarily going to be expecting them to progress load week to week. I'm going to be expecting them to progress technical competence week to week. Just because that one is going to be that one is very hard. It's going to be probably the most fatigue generating movement out of all of them, or protocol out of all of them. So if they start off with like a 225-pound squat, I'm not going to expect them to get that protocol up to 250 because I'm looking at just increasing the amount of volume that they've got and the amount of volume that they can complete at that given load to make sure that they can push that quality further when we go to do something else afterwards. Does that make sense? Cool.
Good context, I think.
Yeah. So again, like looking at these, I kind of wrote this out and on these slides a bit more, but the reason why we're looking at any kind of these three things for any kind of neurological movements is the adaptation that we're looking at training. It fits the most within that category because each one of these has the ability and gives you the ability to display top end strength, right? So an ascending load protocol gives you the ability to do like a heavy triple at RPE 8 or 9. A top set down set has the ability to display a heavy triple at RPE 8, and the rep drops has the ability to display your heavy set of 5 at RPE 8 there, right? So looking at this, any kind of neurological thing is going to be the first thing that you do is going to be where you get the most benefit out of it because you're going to be the freshest and you're going to be the most recovered. And if you guys read the little write-up that I did in the pre-recorded material or pre-learning materials about fatigue, you guys will know that fatigue is just going to be usually built up, usually a result of a buildup of calcium ions, right? So the more calcium ions somebody builds up in training, the less likely they are to be able to recruit high threshold motor neurons as they continue to go. Intermuscular coordination is going to start to slow down, and their muscle recruitment in general is going to start to slow down a bit. So as we're looking at developing more of a neurological thing, what we want to do is give them the ability to work on that as early as possible in the individual session. So neurological stuff is going to come first in my training program as well. Give them the ability to hit this, work hard on this, and then we'll move on afterwards. Moving on to structure, this is where I'll typically start building out the next thing that they're going to do. Straight sets, again, they're just going to be repeating load for each thing or changing and hitting within a certain rep range that I'll have them do. Myo-rep examples further, we have 15s and 5s, 12s and 4s, 10s and 3s, 9s and 2s, whatever it is that you guys want to do with that person, depending on the individual goal. And then individual rep drops again at like 12, 9, 10, 7, right? So if we're looking at the difference on those ones, we do have rep drops here at a much lower volume and a much higher intensity. And we do have them again here at a much lower intensity and higher volume. And the reason why we can use both of these is just depending on what quality we're looking at develop with that individual person. So if I have somebody who's here and we're looking at developing that person's squat pattern or throw pattern or jump pattern, this is what I'm probably going to have them do here. But if I notice somebody who has a structural deficit in quad size, or like a structural deficit in tricep size, I'm probably going to have them do this kind of a rep drop here to just build up a lot more volume at a heavier load and get them to work through a higher degree of training. Does that make sense? Cool. So it just ends up being a different application for each one of them. And then again, capacity-oriented stuff, you can use straight sets again with the super timed rest, myo-reps again, because you're going to be doing about a 15-second rest between each one. And incomplete rest is just going to be the easiest way to get all this stuff done, because all we're looking at with the capacity-oriented stuff towards the end of the training program is how quickly somebody is going to occlude and buffer, right? So what I want to see with this is particularly something like an incomplete rest set. I want to see how many times they can hit that goal number of reps in an individual session with the strict timed rest without changing load. So if this person's doing, let's say, like a bicep curl, right? And they grab 20-pound dumbbells and they've got a goal of 5 sets of 10 with a 30-second rest in between or 20-second rest in between, and they get 10, 10, 8, 6, 6. I want to see that number increase and that threshold increase over time, so I can be sure that that person is not only number one getting stronger, but they're probably buffering out metabolites and metabolic waste products a little bit more efficiently to then make them a more efficient athlete moving forward. So one of the things that we'll use a lot when it comes to training capacity, or like strength training for capacity, is any kind of machine work with a very, very strict timed rest to work on that person's ability to buffer, and then work on building that individual work capacity, then backtracking it into something like rep drops here, then backtracking it again into something like rep drops there, as we're looking at developing that quality a bit more specifically. So again, with this, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, but if we have an understanding of the basic categories that we kind of go through with this, it makes it really, really easy to choose out protocols that you can write. And I believe that's it for what I wanted to go through today. Pretty easy on my side.
Where are your conditioning assessments, Matt?
I don't do any. I don't do any. I can just naturally assume that all, well, so again, like one of the reasons why I don't do many conditioning assessments for my athletes is because my athletes aren't coming to me to be more fit. My athletes are typically coming to me to get more muscular or stronger. And this is one of the reasons why Kyle and I work on these together, is because we pair up really well, where his athletes are typically looking to get more fit, and strength training is a way that's going to help them get more fit as well, because their limiter is getting stronger. Whereas my people aren't really even concerned about cardiovascular capacity whatsoever, but their limiters are usually going to be something that I have to find from the other end of the spectrum on the lifting side, that are going to work into development of other qualities.
Interesting, you used spectrum in your example, but
I chose that word on purpose, Kyle.
no, I really just wanted you to outline that for people, because I think it is important, right? Where we both look at these qualities, like strength work for my, and you guys saw even with like my primary, strength assessments, it's a 3-rep training max. Like I'm not getting highly specific. Like strength is a way to indirectly improve a lot of my athletes' performance.
Yeah.
Whereas same thing with Matt, like conditioning wise, he's just going to program conditioning based protocols with his, as frequent as they need to and no more, because it ends up being a waste of training and too much fatigue. So it's like it's as needed for a lot of his people, because it doesn't necessarily directly contribute to their performance. And sometimes we'll, take away from it just because of a lack of recovery. So again, like that's what we usually, that's just feeds into the conversation where, we do things very differently, and you guys are all going to do things differently probably than even what we do.
Yeah.
And
This is why we do rules, not exact guidelines,
yeah,
or
it's like,
guidelines, not exact like prescriptions.
that's why, again, like when we, Friday, we're going to be asking you guys about some of the things that you're implementing based off your initial intake and assessments, your intake and consultations, like what kind of testing that you're going to be providing for your case study partners and why, and that's going to be something that, as we kind of have these on Friday, like we're never going to tell you anything is wrong. We just want to hear the conversation behind it. We want to hear the rationale, and we want to hear how you're validating that being an appropriate test for the person. And then even more so, how you're going to utilize that information for their programming moving forward. Right. This is something like, I used to talk about a lot in the box gym world when we were doing it, like even like movement screens. It's like, if we're testing people, but we're not using that information from a programming and training perspective, we're just collecting data. It's a complete waste of time. And it's probably having diminishing returns on a lot of our clients, because it's confusing, or it's, creating doubt or threat or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Within their actual fitness and their ability to train. So it's not enough to just test somebody and tell somebody they're not good at anything, or whatever you're testing. You have to be able to also look at that and be like, okay, this is why it's valid, and this is how we're going to progress this quality over the course of the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months, year, right? It's got to be trainable, and there has to be a transition from testing to training that makes sense. You have to be able to see like pretty direct results there. Cool.
So I think that's the homework that we want you guys to start doing is off of the assessment results that you got from your individuals, start building out some assessment protocols for each one of them that would fit within that individual person's goals. And we want you guys to do a little write up on why you chose each one of the things that you chose, what qualities you're looking at develop, and how you think that's going to be best displayed as that person goes through training.
And if any of you still have not been able to contact your partners, please shoot us a message. You can DM us on Discord. That works really well. Or even just email us at info@compoundperformance.info. Just let
Yeah.
us know. And we'll have you reassigned into another group of two
Yeah.
so that you've got some people to work with, because we want to make sure everybody who really wants to participate in this, like, again, we can't make it mandatory. We're not your parents. We can't tell you what to do. But we do want to make sure that everybody who does want to utilize this to its fullest is able to do that. So
Ideally, what you guys will do with this too is when you guys have got your assessment protocols decided, you'll send them to your partner and you'll make them start doing it and tracking some of their outputs.
oh yeah, if somebody's not on super specific training, we highly recommend you go through the testing and share your results with your case study coach, and you guys actually go through each other's tests and record the results. And then as we get into this the next few weeks, we're going to be building training strategies based off of those results. So hopefully you're able to do them.
Because we would love to get you guys doing some more specific data interpretation off of your individual partner's actual results, which will be super useful.
Any questions before Friday then? Or on this stuff specifically that we didn't get to? I don't see anything popping up into the
I see nothing.
You guys.
See one.
So if you also are training some performance athletes, like say you want to look at like vertical jump, maybe want to look at speed, like would you classify that probably? I would say probably high stim or like ATP PC, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we're looking at like sprint acceleration, max vert or max broad. Those are all going to be high stem, like intensive based activities.
High stim, intensive neurological based activities.
Yeah, so we would be testing that again just to get a baseline, and then implementing training strategies to improve those abilities. And I even look at high stem stuff, honestly, like you're building tolerance, you're also building skill a lot of the time. Working with a lot of athletes, and this is where I always kind of like laugh at, like, I don't laugh at them, but like, like the 40, right, is like a standardized test. What most athletes end up training the most to do their 40 at the combine isn't actually getting faster. It's getting a better start. Like most of those athletes aren't actually going to be like, they're pretty high to their like speed ceiling by the time they're 22-year-old elite level college athletes. You're not taking two tenths, or let alone really like 2 to 3 100ths off of a second off of their 40 times. They're getting more efficient at the actual starting process, and that's what's going to improve their time.
Yeah.
It's really timing the jump and getting better skill. Like you don't see a lot of those athletes that have already reached that level improving their mechanics or their ability to produce force that significantly. Like they're already pretty good, right? They're in the top 99.9 percentile of humans in the world at that. What we can do is actually get them starting faster off the gun. That's where you see improvements in time. So again, like there's a lot of skill stuff. Vertical jump, like that's just a lot. That's power. It's again the ability to produce force. But sometimes that's also like learning how to counter jump better, right? Creating like more momentum. Because what's a counter movement on a vertical? It's an explosive stretch shortening cycle. That's all you're doing. Right? So again, it's the ability to promote and accelerate force. And a lot of that is very skill driven at that level. Like if I'm working with a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, yes, we're probably getting physical and physiological adaptations. If I'm working with a 22-year-old Division I, high level, high producing athlete that's being considered from the draft, that person's probably so close to their physical and physiological ceiling the most we can do is improve their skill at the movements and their coordination within the movements to improve their outputs.
It's like
That's
dealing with an athlete that's super strong. Like their technique is probably going to be the one that they've self-selected into that's the most efficient and the most effective one and the most comfortable for them to produce the most force into.
so a lot of that is like on social media when I look at, prep workouts for those things, it's like the training they're doing probably isn't that much different than the training they were doing with their strength and conditioning staffs on campus for the last 4 years. What you're looking at is refining the skills, and really instead of focusing on football, now you're training for the actual combine for 4 months, and then you go back to training. Yeah, and then you go back to training for football again.
Yeah, I just even the classic like agility or change direction test, probably also skill too, especially if you're doing like a 5-10-5 or a T test, whatever. Like, yeah, like it might be a high stim, but at the same time, it's probably just skill.
Yeah, and it's like you can include those things into your training. Like those are things that I would throw into conditioning based days. Like I would have them doing like circular runs. I would have them doing change of direction based stuff. But again, it would probably be 10% of the total session at most. Like again, that's even something I was on a podcast with Jason Fierholter last week, and we were talking. And if you guys don't know him, I'll share his profile, but he's a huge change of direction guy. His videos will make you feel very slow and very unathletic, regardless of your level of athleticism. He's a maniac, but we were talking about just even like implementing these things in with high school athletes and younger, and he's like, yeah, even with that, it's like it's maybe 5 total minutes and like 30 seconds to 2 minutes of total work within like a warm up for most people. Like it's like at the end of the day, you're still training other qualities, but yeah, a lot of it is skill at that level. Like again, improving, like even like Matt said, like improving neurological efficiency. Like what is that? That's skill. That's not a
Skill practice.
James. Like that's skill development, skill acquisition at a certain point, and skill acquisition will always precede physical and physiological adaptation because you build efficiency and efficacy within the system. So a lot of that, it's like if you guys have worked with high level college athletes up close, like Division I people considering the drafts, like it takes you about 30 seconds of watching them move to realize there's not a lot of improvement that you're going to make in 2 months before a combine. Like those guys are already freaks.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. But you can help them with the skills that are very specific to the draft or to the combine or to like a vertical test or a 40 test or a 10-yard acceleration or whatever. So
that's why I break mine down into categories like that, because if we're looking at anything that's going to be skill developing movements fall within that neurological thing. The more that neurological category, the more joint systems and the more muscular systems you have to add into a movement to complete a given task, the more likely that movement is to be neurologically based. That's why that whole section talks about how it's movement oriented as opposed to muscular oriented, because any sort of movement that requires a large amount of intermuscular coordination and a lot of joint systems working together is a skill that you need to work on developing.
And as a side and as a tangent that we'll talk about this more in training applications, if you look at high stem to moderate stem to low stem, what you get is a reverse bell curve there.
Yep.
Where high stem and moderate stem are the most neurologically driven. One is just velocity based and one is proprioceptive typically. And then your moderate stem work, that's where you have the highest levels of constraint, which allow for the least levels of neuromuscular efficiency and the more actual physical and physiological outputs. So we'll talk more about all those things, but yeah, it's fun to play with, but yeah, it's definitely tests like that sometimes are just you can work on developing force, but as people get stronger, their ability to if you improve somebody's squat, their ability to produce force will go up with that. Again, the individual and the level of their coordination depends on like how linear that is or how aligned it is, but everyone's going to improve. But what you can help somebody with is more efficient counter movements, more efficient skill, whatever, just technique work. So always fun to dig in.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anybody else? Cool. We'll see you
Cool.
guys on Friday. Dustin.
Oh, my bad. I had a quick question.
No,
Just
go-
in
yeah, go for
regards to, are there instances where you would not test a high stim tolerance? Say, and I put an example like your Gen Pop client that you kind of
Yeah.
went over last week. Like, how did you test her conditioning without having like, going too in depth, I suppose?
Oh, we did bike sprints.
Yeah.
I
You
didn't
did.
ask-
Okay. Well, let's say if she did not have a bike to sprint on, what
Yeah.
would you, how,
that. Yeah, I mean, if she didn't have and again, like I said, we use the bike specifically because it's low skill, right? So
Yep.
not every, it's what's that old saying? Like everybody's a runner. Everybody's
Right.
not a runner, guys. Like I don't know how to tell you this. Like not right away. Like everybody is bipedal and has the ability to learn how to run, but not everybody is a runner today, right? So having somebody go out and like sprint down their street is probably not going to work out well for Gen Pop. So that would be something that, like you said, where I would probably, if I know they're super Gen Pop, I would throw it out the window and say like, hey, like I can probably assume that you're not very fast, that your high stem output is
Yeah.
not be very good. So what we can do is start working like on other forms of lower level cardio, build a base, and then work our way into the ability to do things that are more velocity driven. Yeah, I would definitely reverse engineer the process on that. The bike is the one caveat where it's like, yeah, I can put you on that.
Anybody can do it.
Go
Yeah,
ham.
you're not gonna hurt yourself on that.
Yeah, just like crush it. Your height. I've had people that, and again, this is not no judgment, but like, yeah, their max wattage is like 350.
Yeah.
It's like you'll see some low numbers, and it's like, okay, we can work with that. Like, I'm not going to do as much percentage based stuff there. Like, I'll probably just even like say, hey, you know what, we're going to do a mile test, and I'll start basing everything off that instead of max wattage. That's where I would do like that way. It's much easier for me to say, hey, you got a 6:32 mile test, and we can start working on like 1 minute intervals based off of whatever, that's whatever wattage marker that is, and start building up volume and getting comfortable at that rate or at that pacing, at that amount of velocity, and then start improving over time. Again, it's funny because for most of our athletes, like testing for performance athletes, like testing usually provides like you're testing against a standard and they're trying to meet something. For a lot of Gen Pop clients, it's like testing is going to provide your baseline.
Yeah. They are the standard that they're going to progress against.
It's just like, hey, this is where you're at, and we're just going to try to improve this over time.
Yeah.
So that's where like 100%, like, yeah, if they have a bike available, I'll do it. It might not yield like great information, but if it's like,
Right.
oh yeah, I have a rower or I can run, it's like, I might just do something else.
Yeah.
If you have doing things.
Yeah,
I'll
'cause I would
typically
absolutely
ask
do this.
them. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I would absolutely do the same thing as long as I can create some sort of a measurable proxy to work against, right? Because if it's something that I can
Okay.
use that's measurable, I don't really care what the modality is. If it's measurable and trainable and repeatable, then it's going to be something that I'm data that I'm interested in collecting with that person.
Right on. Okay.
I have a question. So in terms of like golf, like the game of golf, an aerobic test, would that be even like necessary given the fact that you can be, I mean, you don't have to be as super fit?
You'd be smoking cigs as you're walking down the court.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, again, like that might be something that, kind of like what we talked about with Dean yesterday, like with testing blocks last week. Like, yeah, it might, like there's going to be things that might not be appropriate within your testing. It might not be valid at all. Like I might still do an aerobic test of some kind just for general health if I cared that much or if they cared, but for performance based things, yeah, it might not be a marker that I really care that much about. And that's where we're kind of looking at, even talking about last week based on the consultation and the feedback that you're getting from the person you're working with.
But
prioritize like maybe the top 3 or 4 things that you want to test. You don't have to test everything. There's going to be some things that are leading indicators and some that are lagging. So you might even find that, it's like, hey, this person's like not very fast and has low velocity, but they're also like they're not very trained. So just increasing their basic strength is probably going to drag some of those things with it. It might be the tide that raises, you know, all ships or whatever. And I'm better off just improving strength early on and allowing like the ability to produce force and higher velocities to be a lagging indicator. And then in a few months or whatever, as we get more trained, as they get stronger, then I can get more velocity specific, right? You might find that if you're doing, you know, top 3 or 4 things that are going to improve or have the highest ROI on somebody's training, that yeah, like oxidative aerobic fitness is not it for this person. Similar to like Matt's strength sport athlete. It's like he has no reason to do an oxidative threshold test for his power lifters.
I'll do some oxidative conditioning with them to improve
he'll-
weekly volume tolerance, but I'm
Is
not
it-
going to do that's not a test on a run.
Okay.
Yeah. It's about fitting the right tests for that individual person. And like you can do some aerobic tests, but is that juice worth the squeeze?
Okay, so basically you're saying like first get them stronger, then go into like some velocity work to see if that's what they need essentially.
Yeah, if that's going to be more relevant to their ability to hit a ball far, you know, or
Cool.
whatever, right? Like, I mean, that's where I would lean into. And you know, again, it might even because even, you know, if you look at, you know, they're playing 18 holes or whatever, and it's like their yardage is dropping significantly over the back half, even then it's probably a repeat power deficiency and not like aerobic capacity.
It's definitely not aerobic.
Right. So they have plenty of recovery time there. So yeah, it's like that could be something that you might include in their training just to be general and like kind of round out and be holistic or whatever. But testing wise, like I would probably not worry about it too much.
Yeah. And if it's something that's going to increase that person's training frequency and just get them doing something more often, I'm absolutely going to program it in. It's just not going to be a priority.
Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Dean, it's funny you mentioned Seidman. I actually trained somebody who trained with Joel Seidman for the last like 5 years. And still
I was
works
waiting for somebody to bite.
still works out of his gym. I will say this. She's strong as shit and very fit and looks like she trains. Like as much as it's fun to
I've seen her. She looks more like she lifts than most of the people who make fun of Joel Seedman do.
and she's like 50, she's like 47 and has striated delts. And the first time we did, she ended up on a 3x3 her testing block. She weighs about 130 pounds and she did a 215 triple on her back squat. Probably not even close to a 9, you know, and did an RDL at like 350, like triple at 315. Like there, it's funny because it's like one, I think Joel is the biggest troll on the internet and knows how to farm engagement better than anybody in this industry.
Read the
Two,
article.
yeah. Two, dude, I would honestly, as much as I think his shit is just stupid looking, like based on some of the people that I've seen that have worked with him, there's a lot worse out there that we probably think is a lot better just based on personal relationships and own personal biases. Because I see a lot of people that don't get any results whatsoever with things that people think are a lot more practical.
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with Marco Sanchez, a very good friend of mine who I've known for many years, and we had some deep conversations about the combine and skill acquisition and some stuff. And Seidman's name popped into the conversation, which was an interesting topic for our Sunday night musings, as it were. But it was good. It was a good conversation.
I would love to sit down with him for an hour, like with no cameras, no nothing, and just like talking about training and see what he actually said.
Yeah. I had this same conversation with Keir as well when he did the so I know Keir quite well.
Yeah.
He did like a live debate with him, but they had some like rebuttals and stuff beforehand, right? They were engaging a bit, chewing the fat, as it were, before the conversation started. And actually they agreed on quite a lot of philosophies. Yeah, when they went into the live sort of podcast YouTube thing, it was clearly not the case, and it got heated and it was good. But yeah, I think it's
brand push. We'll put
He
it.
does.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Listen, I get it. I get it. I do. It's just interesting. You mentioned some of the social media space, and I think I've fallen into the trap of some of that shit before, and it's interesting how
We all have.
Oh, for sure. Like
all
for
have,
sure,
yeah.
right? What's important in life? I think yeah, it's an interesting game to play.
I mean, we all know
At
what's
least
important in life is
it's-
likes on your posts on Instagram over the actual results that you can get for your clients.
There's nothing I love.
Apparently
more.
so, yeah. The vanity metrics of
Yes,
a
that's all that
quarter
matters.
turn and showcasing your assets, apparently. Yeah.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. To be fair, Matt, maybe you should don a pair of Lulu leggings and just stand there in a quarter turn with a tight crop top on. It might
It
go
would work.
down really
It would work.
I had put out a
Oh,
CAPS
dear.
program. You would never hear from Compound Performance again.
Nope.
You would be swimming in money like Scrooge McDuck. He won't do it. He's selfish and he won't create a Cavs program for us. And
Listen,
I
Matt,
won't sell my
Matt on
calves.
Matt on OnlyFans could be a different breed for a lot of you. I'm just saying, could be a different breed. It could be this could take Compound Performance to a different streaming business, and the entertainment industry could be a vibe.
well, at least you guys know this video to just cut it off in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
If you rewind.
Oh dear.
All right, you guys. So we're gonna post that homework up in the case study section on the Discord again. But just as a reminder, we want you guys to start picking out some assessment protocols, writing out which ones you're going to use, programming them out, right? Like, so put out the rep scheme, set scheme, intensities, everything you want to use with it. Write out what you're looking at developing with it, why you're choosing that specific one for your person, and then we want you to submit it to the Discord, and then also give it to your partners so they can start actually doing them. And partners, we want you guys to give them the results after you've done it. Cool.
All right. We'll see you guys on Discord and hopefully Friday.
See you Friday.
All right, have a great rest of the day.
Later, guys.